We tend to believe love is loud, that it's about how much we do, how often we show up, how loudly we declare, look how much I care. But love, especially in men, often speaks in whispers, in stillness, in what isn't said. And here's the contradiction. The more you try to prove your love through relentless giving, explaining, fixing, pleasing, the further away he may feel. Why? Because the effort to earn connection can come across as mistrust in his capacity to meet you halfway. It becomes a silent accusation. You're not enough unless I keep doing everything. This creates a quiet ache, an internal war between the desire to be seen and the fear of being still. When you're no longer performing, when you're not rescuing the relationship from silence, who are you? You see, men don't bond by watching you overfunction. They bond when they feel emotionally safe, not smothered, not managed, not observed like a project. The truth is, men aren't emotionally absent. They're emotionally self-protective. And when they sense pressure, the walls come up. It's not that they don't care. It's that they can't connect under surveillance. The contrast is jarring. You're pouring in effort, and he's pulling away. You're communicating more, and he's saying less. But emotional intimacy isn't earned through doing. It's built in the calm presence of being. The 5 things men truly want. They're not tasks on a list. They're deeper than service. They're about emotional resonance. And the irony, you reach them not by trying harder, but by softening into who you are. And that's not because he doesn't care. It's because he's overwhelmed. In my research with thousands of couples, I've seen this pattern again and again. A woman is trying to bridge the gap. She's working hard, emotionally, mentally, sometimes physically, to make the relationship feel alive. But the more she does, the more he shuts down, the more she reaches, the more he withdraws. This isn't Seth's rejection. It sets emotional flooding. Men are biologically more prone to flooding in emotionally intense conversations. Their heart rate spikes faster, they disengage more quickly, they often interpret emotional intensity, even when it's loving, as danger, and so they retreat, not because they don't love you, but because they don't know how to stay regulated with you. Here's the first aha moment when he shuts down. It's not always avoidance, it's survival. This is where many couples go into crisis. You sense the disconnection, so you increase your efforts. You call, explain, pursue, overfunction. He senses that surge and doubles down on detachment. Now you're both dysregulated, you're in chase mode, and he's in shutdown mode. This is the emotional standoff I've seen destroy even the most well-meaning couples. So let's break this cycle using something I call the behavior insight healing loop. Behavior. You notice he sets, gone silent again. This leads us into one of the most important Gottman concepts, bids for connection. Men don't often say, I need to feel emotionally safe with you, but they'll make a quiet joke. They'll sit next to you on the couch without words. They'll send a meme, fix something in the house, ask if you're hungry. That's a bid if you miss it, because you're too busy managing the relationship instead of experiencing it. The moment passes. If you meet it with presence, it opens a door. Here's the second aha insight. Your stillness is sometimes a louder bid for connection than your effort. And this is where silence becomes not a threat, but a gift, a reset, conscious detachment, choosing not to explain, not to fix, not to perform, gives both of you space to regulate. It restores your dignity and reminds you you are not responsible for another person's emotional weather. That's his work. And if you do it for him, you rob him of the chance to step forward on his own. Let's tie this into another core idea, love maps. These are the inner roadmaps of your partner's world, what he loves, fears, dreams of. But here's the catch. If your emotional landscape is always filled with urgency, resentment, or hypervigilance, there's no room to explore you're narrating your pain instead of learning his quiet. Sometimes knowing your partner isn't about asking him to talk more. It's about listening when he doesn't talk, observing how he rests, what he repeats, when he softens. Now, we can't ignore the real damage caused by what I call the four horsemen: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. These toxic patterns don't start as weapons. They start as reactions to emotional injury. If you're over-explaining, overcorrecting, or constantly pursuing, you may be unintentionally criticizing or controlling, not out of malice, but out of exhaustion. That can trigger his defensiveness or stonewalling, and the cycle deepens. Here's just the internal reframe. I'm not responsible for fixing his emotional distance. I'm responsible for staying connected to myself when it happens. That's where true connection is built, in self-soothing, not sacrificing, in choosing to respond with regulated presence, not emotional chasing. Your calm nervous system is the safest place a man can land, but it has to be real, not performed, not conditional. Let me leave you with this. You're not too much, you're not doing it wrong, but the love you're offering might not be reaching him because it's shaped by effort, not embodiment. He doesn't want to be rescued. He wants to feel safe enough to emerge. So stop trying to do more. Start being more of who you are when you're not trying to hold everything together. That sets where intimacy begins. Men don't need your doing. They need your groundedness. That's what makes love feel like home. Her name was Aaliyah, mid-30s, smart, driven, emotionally generous to a fault. She had always believed that love was about showing up, that if someone was slipping away, you held on harder. You did more, said more, stayed longer. With David, she gave everything. Not extravagantly, but in subtle, invisible ways. She learned his triggers so she could avoid them, softened her tone when she sensed his tension, sent long, vulnerable texts when he grew cold. She carried the emotional weight of the relationship like a second skin. At first, he loved how understanding she was. That's what he said. But over time, his presence began to dim. He'd scroll through his phone while she was mid-sentence. He'd respond to her feelings with silence. Not anger, not cruelty, just nothing. A blank face, a nod. One night she sat in her car outside his apartment, phone in hand, thumb hovering over a message that began with, "I just need you to talk to me, please." She had sent versions of that message before, dozens. Sometimes he replied, usually hours later, with a "sorry, I was tired." Other times he didn't reply at all. But she always waited like love had a finish line, and she just had to endure a little longer to reach it. This time, though, something shifted. The message sat on her screen. The little blinking cursor was like a heartbeat. Her breath stalled in her chest, not from fear, but from fatigue. Deep, bone-level fatigue. The kind that says, you stir not in danger, but you stir not alive either. And then she backspaced the message, slowly, deliberately, letter by letter. If she didn't cry, she didn't rage, she just sat there in that small, almost holy pause, the space between reaction and reclamation. A whisper-like voice inside her, the kind she sat silenced for years, said, "This isn't love. This is proving it wasn't about David anymore." Not really. It was about how many times she'd believed that if she could just explain better, love harder, shrink more gently, he would stay. That if she did enough, she'd be enough. But sitting in that quiet car, No music, no message sent, just her breath and her truth. She met herself. And the mirror moment hit her not like a thunderclap, but like a soft return. Yes, I've been waiting to be chosen by someone I kept choosing over myself. Elia didn't storm away. She didn't block him. She didn't create a dramatic ending. She just drove home and made tea, lit a candle, turned off her phone, and for the first time in a long time, slept without checking it. That was the night she didn't lose him. She simply stopped losing herself. And the healing began not with a conversation, but with silence that honored her dignity. The moment she stopped begging for love was the moment she remembered she was it. Let's talk about what emotional intelligence actually looks like, not as a concept, but as a practice inside relationships. Because when we say men don't care about what you do for them, they only want 5 things, what we're really saying is your presence, your energy, and your emotional regulation matter far more than your efforts to manage or prove love. And if you've been overfunctioning, giving more than you receive, explaining instead of connecting, it's time to shift. These tools aren't about getting him back. They're about getting you back. Your peace, your clarity, your internal compass. Let's begin with something simple but powerful. Try this tonight. The 60-second pause. When you feel that urge rising to text, to explain, to chase connection, pause, 60 seconds, breathe, let the nervous system recalibrate. According to our research at the Gottman Institute, couples who can pause before reacting are significantly more likely to de-escalate conflict and preserve emotional safety. That 1-minute space might sound small, but it interrupts the emotional hijack when cortisol floods the system and you stop responding from clarity. During that pause, ask yourself, what outcome am I actually seeking, and can I offer it to myself first? This is how self-soothing begins. And when you can regulate before reacting, you stop outsourcing your emotional peace to someone else's behavior. Next, something I consider sacred in the work of emotional attunement. Name it to tame it. This phrase, coined by Dr. Dan Siegel and supported by effect labeling research, is rooted in neurobiology. Simply put, when you can identify and name your emotional experience, I feel unseen, I feel anxious, I feel like I'm disappearing in this relationship, the brain moves out of reactivity and into regulation. Instead of spiraling in the emotion, you start to observe it. Try saying it aloud or write it in a journal. Use specific emotional language. Sad is one layer, but abandoned, dismissed, or invisible carries more truth. Once it's named, it's contained, not eliminated, but held. You are no longer just the emotion, you're the person witnessing it. Here's just a tool that creates real internal repair, especially if you've been stuck in overgiving. The 3-1 internal repair method. For every emotional trigger, especially when you feel dismissed, unheard, or overextended, offer yourself 3 grounded self-validations. Example, trigger, he didn't just respond to my emotional check-in. Internal repair. Is this okay that I wanted connection? That's this human. His response or lack of it is not a measure of my worth. This 3-1 ratio counterbalances your nervous system's tendency to fixate on the trigger. It restores emotional gravity, pulling you back into self-trust rather than spiraling in self-doubt. This practice is deeply aligned with what we've found in decades of relationship research. How you speak to yourself about the relationship has more impact on your well-being than how often you speak to your partner. And finally, a ritual that offers profound clarity, the evening journal prompt. What did I give today that I didn't set receive in return? Write it without judgment, not to tally or accuse, but to observe. Maybe you gave patience, presence, a thoughtful check-in. Then ask yourself, was that offering sustainable, or was it a silent plea to be seen? Over time, this prompt reveals patterns. You'll start to notice where your energy leaks, where you've been giving from scarcity, not abundance, and most importantly, where it's time to realign your energy with your worth. Relationships thrive not from over-efforting, but from attunement, not from chasing safety, but from creating it, first in yourself and then between you. So pause, name, repair, reflect. These are not tactics. These are skills of emotional maturity. They don't just shift the relationship, they shift you. And when you're anchored in yourself, you stop needing to be rescued. You start being deeply, quietly, and powerfully home. If you're feeling invisible right now, if you've been loving from empty hands, talking into silence, waiting for someone to turn toward you, I want you to know you're not broken. You're not weak. You're just tired. Tired from trying to keep something alive by yourself. Tired from doing all the emotional heavy lifting while feeling like your needs are too loud, your feelings too complicated, your love too much. And here sits the truth I've seen in decades of research. It's not that men don't care. It's that they care differently. Differently doesn't mean less. But if you're speaking in the language of overgiving, of chasing, of managing every unspoken tension, he might not even realize you're trying to connect. He might only feel the pressure, not the love behind it. So here, Estes, the moment I want you to consider, and it might land hard, what if the more you explain, the more you try to fix, the more he hears, I don't trust you to meet me where I am? What if your constant reaching is being interpreted not as closeness, but as control? That's not your fault. This is what happens when your nervous system becomes the manager of the relationship, when your love becomes labor and your silence feels like danger. Because the truth is, for many women, silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like punishment. But here sets your goosebump moment. Silence isn't always abandonment. Sometimes it's the sacred sound of returning to yourself. You've poured so much of yourself into being chosen that you forgot you get to choose too. You've tried to prove your value by giving endlessly, but real intimacy doesn't come from effort. It comes from emotional safety. And you don't get there by performing love. You get there by embodying self-worth. Now I want to offer you a mirror, not for judgment, for truth. What if you weren't too much, just unprotected? What if your emotions aren't overwhelming, they're just unguarded? What if your depth was never the problem, only the absence of someone willing or able to meet you there? That reframe, is this that just healing? Is this liberation? Because when you stop over-explaining, you create space for him to notice. When you stop rescuing the emotional climate, you invite him to take responsibility. When you stop fighting to be heard, you start listening to yourself, and you realize that your voice was never too much. It just hadn't been fully honored yet. This is your turning point. So here sets the transformation statement I want you to carry with you. I don't chase. I don't beg. I don't prove. I invite and I allow space for others to meet me where I am. And when they don't, I don't shrink. I stay rooted. And from that place, loved ones feel like labor. It will feel like home. We began with a contradiction that love isn't about how much you do, but how safe someone feels in your presence. And maybe that landed like a wound, especially if you've spent years proving, pleasing, over-functioning in the name of love. If effort has been your currency, the idea that it might not be what's truly needed can feel like loss. But here's what I hope you see now. It was never your effort that made you lovable. It was your being, your groundedness, your depth, your stillness. That stillness isn't the absence of care. It's the presence of self-trust. You no longer have to chase closeness or over-explain your worth. You separate in something quieter and stronger. So when you feel the pull to overgive again, remember this. You were never too much. You were just unprotected. And now you are no longer that version of yourself. You are no longer the woman who waits in silence. You are the silence, the kind that holds dignity, the kind that teaches others how to meet you, the kind that doesn't ask, am I enough? Because it already knows. Stillness isn't silence, isn't where your clarity lives now.